What's up? I want to talk about the Edgar Rice Burroughs books I read over the first 2 weeks of Rocket Summer. Um, I read Tanar of Pellucidar, and I read The Synthetic Men of Mars, which were published in 1929 and 1939, respectively. And then just a couple days ago, here in the middle of week two of Rocket Summer, I've read the final two Mars books, which I'll talk about in a second. So let me start with Tanner of Pellucidar, which is the third Pellucidar novel. These are the Athir's core novels where there's David Ennis and his partner, whose name escapes me, build an iron mole drilled to the center of the earth where they find, as one often does, that the earth is hollow and the core of the earth forms like a sun. And so there's this interior world where it's always daylight, except for one area, which is full of dinosaurs and all kinds of cool stuff. This is I like happens in the Mars series after the first initial adventure. In this one of David Innes, he becomes emperor of everything. Uh, and Burroughs starts to move on to other characters, which kind of here's a confession for me as an Edgar Rice Burroughs fan, who's probably, I would say, definitely my favorite writer, fifth, sixth, seventh grade. But I didn't read as many of his books as I thought I did. I would drop out of these series when they kind of settled in, when kind of the main conflict was over. So the first two books are about David Innes conquering Pellucidar. The Mars books, the first three books are a trilogy. John Carter, Princess of Mars, Gods of Mars, and Warlord of Mars are their own story where John Carter totally integrates into the society, marries Deja Thoris, they settle down, they have kids. The fourth book is Thuvia, Maid of Mars, which is really a dull, uninteresting book. It's just an adventure about Cartharus, the Nepo baby son of Deja Thoris and John Carter, and he rescues a maiden, whatever. It's just a sort of a standard Sword and Planet story, which I really think is not I think it's what people think of when they think of Edgar Rice Burroughs books, but he really had a lot more world building in that. In fact, like in the Pellucidar stories, there's a lot of thinking about how time is thought of, how time is measured, how time is perceived by human beings in a world where there's no days and nights, where it's just perpetual sun. Um, and he would come up with ideas like that, like in like in the Lost Continent, or A Land That Time Forgot, where there's this lost continent, and in different parts of the continent are different stages of evolution. I don't want to overstate it and say that he was like a brilliant um, e- examiner of different uh, theoretical scientific speculations or anything like that, but they are pretty cool, even though they don't hold up to scrutiny. Here's Tanner Pellucidar in Blue Book original publication. You can see they're really trying to push this as a Tarzan novel. They're really hoping to buy this quickly and say, "Oh, okay, here's a Tarzan related thing. Tanner, the new novel by the author of Tarzan," and kind of what they did through all of Kingsley Amas's career, where his first book was a big hit, Lucky Jim, and then every book after that would say his best novel since Lucky Jim, when they would come out. And this is also what happens in Synthetic Men of Mars, which is the ninth Mars book. I don't think you can see it there, but it says the master of the amazing writes his greatest story since Tarzan, the Synthetic Men of Mars. Now this was Synthetic Men of Mars was 1939, so I'd read it last week. I really enjoyed it. It's a story in which John Carter takes part. Deja Thoris is in a mid-air collision off screen, and he and one of his lieutenants, one of his trusted lieutenants, or the son of one of his last trusted lieutenants, go looking for this character named, I better look that up. Who was it? They go and look for the characters, the main character in the Mastermind of Mars, which I believe was the sixth book, who's this mad scientist. Is it going to give me his name here? Rastavas, who is a mad scientist who does like brain swaps and stuff like that. So they're looking for him. And they go to this place where they think he's heard of, and he's engaged in new experiments of creating synthetic monsters, very similar to the idea that Burroughs used in his novella number 13, which is like one of his third or fourth published things, which I think is mostly known by the name of The Monster Men now, which is kind of a mashup of Frankenstein and Island of Dr. Moreau. And he has the same kind of, and in that book, the mad scientist creates these trying to create humans, but they come out very bad. And he numbers them 1 through 13. 13 is as far as he gets. However, Rasavas he's doing much better. He's made thousands of these things, and he's still doing the numbering thing. Anyway, so John Carter's aide here is a man named Vordage, who gets sort of has to through various machinations has to do a body swap with one of these. What are they called? Hormones. There's some. Uh, the Hormads, yeah, which are the zombie characters, and they're simulacrum characters. He has to body swap with one, so he's living as this horrible, ugly, deformed creature, trying to resolve all the problems they have. He meets a woman. He kind of has to win her over through his personality because he's so hideous looking now, and anyway, so it's mostly their story. There's cool ideas in it though. There's the synthetic man. There's the people swapping out for better bodies and things like that. There's also this big goo sludge that kind of takes over the big city where they're in, which is kind of like the loose kind of Hormud technology. Is just like a big mass of gross stuff. And I really enjoyed it. Maybe having come back to the series, it was not popular at the time. It was rejected. It appeared in. Where's I get back to my pictures here? It appeared in Argosy. This was his third choice. It was rejected by 2 other magazines, including Blue Book, which was one of his big things. So it was not really, considering, at this time, 1939, Edgar Rice Burroughs is already hugely rich, owns his own giant estate, Tarzana, that he bought with his Tarzan money. Very popular, could sell stuff just on his name or just on the name Tarzan by the creator of Tarzan. And looking over the reception at the time and later, it's really, by Richard Lupoff and people like that, really not considered one of his best books, but I thought it was a really fun yarn, really quite an adventure. Here's the copy I had as a kid, for years, which I never read because I couldn't get past Thuvia Maid of Mars. But here again, we've got it's an alien world with like kind of ridiculous, over the top kind of creatures and concepts, which is what separates Burroughs, I think, from other Sword and Planet stories where it's mostly just a guy with a sword who goes and fights some ape men or whatever and becomes king of the world. But Burroughs always has all this hate this term, but I don't know what to say, world building, all these concepts, all these weird ideas for different species and different kind of offshoots of humanity and that kind of thing. So that was what I read. And then so for this week, this is the second week of um, Rocket Summer. I read the final books in the series. Oh no, I didn't. I'll get some covers here. I read Llana of Gathol, and then I read the 11th book, which John Carter of Mars, which is really not a book, but get to that in a minute. Llana of Gathol. You can see there's these creatures, or actually they're actually just soldiers that are suspended upside down. That's one of the adventures. Llana of Gathol. This is probably the first hardback. By this time, Edgar Rice Burroughs had his own publishing company. Was bringing his books out. Normally, he would sell them to a magazine, and then he would bring them out as hardcovers from his own publisher, and kept a lot of his money that way. Llana of Gathol is the first book in the Mars series that uses a technique that Burroughs would use increasingly towards the end of his life, where he would write 4 novellas, 4 novelettes, publish them in magazines, and then collect them. They kind of connected and then collect them as a book instead of writing just a straight novel. So Synthetic Men of Mars was the last Mars novel. Then Llana of Gathol is 4 connected stories. Llana of Gathol is John Carter's granddaughter. I think she's the daughter of Tara, his daughter. She might be the daughter of Cartharus, his son. Anyway, it's kind of a different sort of relationship because John Carter, even though he's got grandchildren who are adults, he still looks 30 years old. And Martians in general live for 1,000 years, and they only start to look old at the very, very end of their lives. So he talks about her more like his daughter than his granddaughter. He starts out this book just on an adventure by himself. He has some things he wants to work out in his mind. So he takes his little flyer and he goes off to an unknown part of Mars. And then lo and behold, he runs into his granddaughter. And he meets a guy named, I forget his name, not that important, who's a member of what was previously believed the lost race of Mars, the white race, the white skin race. So up to this point in the book, John Carter's the only person with white skin. He lives with the real man. Diothorus is a red, one of the red men of Mars. Losing my microphone here. I'm getting in the weeds on all this history stuff, but anyway. So he meets this character who's got blonde hair and white skin. I hope my sound isn't messed up now because my mic fell off. And he's got a thing. The young guy, he's a young guy. He's got a thing for Llana, who kind of disses him. She really negs him, and in the first couple of novellas, the end was kind of unfunny. There's a lot of humor in this book, more than in most the earlier books. There's kind of some self-parody where they keep, in their efforts to get back to helium, because they're in this other part of Mars where no one's even heard of helium, and that's kind of a joke in the fact that it's almost Monty Python-esque, where John Carter explains to these people, one of the races, that he is the warlord of Mars and a warlord of Barsum, and they're like, well, who made that? We never even heard of helium. We never even heard of you people. And you claim you're the warlord of Mars. Later, when they meet another group of people who explain, the representatives of this group explain that they're the most powerful race on Mars and that they're poised about to take over the whole planet. And John Carter's like, yeah, I hear that a lot. Every time I go into a new civilization, they're the most powerful race. So there's great action scenes in here. John Carter does some good gladiator stuff. One thing I thought was kind of remarkable was and what year was this? This was, like I said, early. Did I write down the individual stories? 1941. Still just on the verge of World War II. Um, Burroughs was in his mid 60s, I guess, 65 or something like that. He would go on to be a war correspondent in World War II. The introduction to the story I thought was very interesting. Is very, as you probably know if you read any Burroughs, he would often, not always, but often use these framing devices where Burroughs would meet John Carter, who was visiting Earth, or he would receive a manuscript through some way. And starting with Tanar of Pellucidar, he makes a friend named Jason Gridley, who invents this radio that can miraculously contact any Burroughs hero, whether they're on Venus or Mars or at the center of the Earth. Um, and in this one, Burroughs is in Hawaii, and he gets approached by John Carter, who's happy to see him and says, "I wanted to come back to Earth and see you because I realize you're the last person who remembers me. You're the last human that I know, the last Earth man. And when you're gone, there's not going to be any others." And Burroughs is like, "Of course there will be. There's my children know who you are," um, which maybe comes into play in a little bit later, maybe a year later. And it's very quite what's the word, elegiac, elegiac, um, kind of melancholy ending. It's not the last Mars book. It's not the last one he would write, but then Burroughs tells him these stories of Llana of Gathol. But I kind of wonder. This is pure speculation. If Burroughs felt at this time that kind of science had caught up with him, had caught up with the Mars stories, which of course were originally the first one was written in 1912, and that he really couldn't. Burroughs uh, really couldn't continue this series realistically anymore because more was known about the world. At this time, we're 4 years away from the atomic bomb. And it could just be Burroughs feeling his age and thinking that, but it kind of struck me. But again, a really good adventure book. I really enjoyed reading Synthetic Man of Mars and Llana of Gathol at this time. The final book in the series was written, the parts that it's was called John Carter Mars when it was finally issued as a book, I think in the 60s during the Burroughs revival. It contains two stories. I'm going to talk about the second one first, which is Skeleton Man of Jupiter. Amazing stories. In this story, John Carter gets kidnapped and taken to Jupiter. Again, there's interesting ideas where Burroughs, and I don't want to overstate, I think I might have already said this, I don't want to overstate how, like, Edgar Rice Burroughs is some scientific visionary or anything, but he does deal with, as they're going to Jupiter, where he's kidnapped by these skeleton men who want him for a specific reason. They want to conquer or I don't know why they want to conquer Mars, which is a dying world, and not the Earth. But anyway, on his way there, he's thinking, well, I'm just going to die on Jupiter because of the immense gravity, and it's a gas giant, and there's no place to stand, and I'll just be flattened. That none of that happens. It turns out Jupiter, much like the center of the Earth, which is not like what the silly scientists think. Jupiter is quite different. It's a world under a very thick atmosphere that you can walk around on and stuff, and the spinning gravity and the spin of the world makes it so John Carter's even stronger than he is on Mars, which is much stronger than he is on Earth. And there's all that stuff. Oh man, do I have this? Oh, I guess I didn't. Did I save it? Oh, okay. There's this hilarious scene in this book. Oh man, I guess I didn't save it. Thought I did. Maybe it's on my other phone. But as they're going down to Jupiter and to this main city on Jupiter, these people are taking them for their own reasons. he looks out and he goes, "Oh man, it's just like Salt Lake City. It's just so ugly from the air." And I thought that was a really funny uh, observation to have in a John Carter of Mars book, where apparently John Carter at some point has gone back to Earth. He left Earth originally in the 1860s or 70s, right after World War, right after the Civil War, and but at some point he's taken some flights around Southwest United States and flying into Salt Lake City, and seeing him just looks hideous. Um, again, it's kind of this feeling that maybe it's a bit absurd to have these kind of sword and planet adventures in the 40s. It was intended, Skeleton Men of Jupiter was intended to be another book along the lines of Llana of Gathol, where it was going to be four themed stories that presumably would end up with John Carter back on Mars, and everything, and the planned revolution, planned invasion thwarted and all that. But it ends on with him and Deja Thoris being reunited. They're both on Jupiter. Um, so for whatever reason, he didn't complete that quartet, and it could have been he just lost interest. It was also, like I said, it was published in, I believe this one was published in 43, so it was during the middle of the war, and Burroughs did become a war correspondent, so he never finished that series. That leaves just one more book to talk about, and I probably should have, don't need to give it too much thought because it is well known as being not written by Edgar Rice Burroughs, and it is John Carter and the Giant of Mars. Um, where did it go? Which started life as a big little book, or not a big little book, but a type of book by Whitman Publishing called the Better Little Books, which I guess means they're better than the big little books. It was, uh, I don't know if people remember what the big little books were now. It would be like a page of text and an illustration on each page. And um, it was illustrated by John Coleman Burroughs, who was an illustrator who was there was Edgar Rice Burroughs' son. It was credited to Edgar, but it's pretty commonly accepted today that actually was written by John Coleman Burroughs. Uh, he fights this giant. It's kind of really out of time. It's kind of, the continuity's messed up on it. Tars Tarkas is a main character who's really not been in the series for a very long time, so it's kind of weird how he shows up. This character, the monster is kind of based on the same technology as the synthetic men of Mars, so it's very badly written, very dully written. You can tell it's not Burroughs. John Carter's sometimes referred to just as Carter. It's written in the third person, but you read all the books and no one calls John Carter Carter, or Burroughs never calls him Carter. It's always John Carter, the full name. It's another thing that's really obviously is what a good writer of action Edgar Rice Burroughs is, because when you read this, the action is terrible. The action scenes are really inept. It was later published in Amazing after this. They kind of revised it a little and did get a magazine sale out of it in a generic magazine. Very obviously not written by Burroughs. I would guess though that he probably came up with a plot. Remember, this book, this was written for children, and I think Burroughs probably gave an outline to his son, who wrote it kind of based on the illustrations he wanted to do. It's kind of a depressing end to the series. I would say skip it, but if you're reading through all the Burroughs books, if you've gone through all 11 Burroughs books, you're probably not going to skip it. And it's interesting. According to Wikipedia, Dick Richard Lupoff, the pretty well-known Edgar Rice Burroughs scholar, says the only value in it is reading it and then reading Skeleton Men of Mars and just seeing how much better a writer, how actually Edgar Rice Burroughs is really a great writer of adventure stories. So that's what I read for Edgar Rice Burroughs. I have, these are going on too long. I'm going to have to talk about less books each time. But anyway, those are the Burroughs books I read for Rocket Summer weeks 1 and 2. I've read some other science fiction for Rocket Summer week 2, 1940s science fiction. And I will talk about that another time. Talk to you guys later.